Up next on 5 City TV, a community conversation, Future of Lincoln, sponsored by Leadership Lincoln, the Lincoln Journal-Star, the University of Nebraska Public Policy Center, and funding provided by the Cooper Foundation and the Woods Charitable Fund. Now, here's tonight's moderator, Rod Bates, General Manager, NET.
Welcome, everybody. At this point, Channel 5 is going to start televising, or start filming, because this will be televised. And so what I'm going to do is repeat some of the things I said at the outset so that for the folks watching at home, they'll know what is going on and what you've done. So I want to re-welcome everybody who I welcomed earlier, and I'd like to welcome those of you who just have come in recently. But thank you very much. My name is Alan Tompkins from the Public Policy Center, and I'm just so pleased today to be here helping to facilitate this discussion about the quality of life and future of Lincoln. This is a partnership between or among Leadership Lincoln, the Lincoln Journal-Star, and the University of Nebraska Public Policy Center. This has been a collaborative event in which we are trying to listen to the voices of residents in Lincoln and Lancaster County about the future of Lincoln. This is a deliberative model that we're using here, which has three parts. The first part is everybody who is attending receives some information, preliminary information about the issues discussed this evening. Now I'm forgetting where I'm at in my little spiel. Number two. Okay. Now I wanted to say, I wanted to say that these materials have been published in the Lincoln Journal-Star over the last 4 weeks, and so you can get them online if you wish to read them. The second part of this is people have been discussing the issues. They've been in small groups. We've had 5 groups, about 10 to 15 people per group, discussing the issues germane to the quality of life here in Lincoln. The third part of this, and this is the part we're at now, is we are pleased to have an expert panel, and the role of the expert panel is to answer questions posed by the people participating in the discussions, factual and other issues that they want to get input from our group of experts. Moderating this panel will be Rod Bates. Rod is General Manager of Nebraska Educational Telecommunications and Director of University Television and General Manager of UNL station KUON-TV. And I'm going to turn this now over to Rod Bates. Rod, thank you so much.
Thank you, Alan. Well, you've come back from your small groups right on schedule, and I'm pleased to say there are absolutely no issues that you have with the future of Lincoln and the quality of life. So we're adjourned. Thank you so much. I was able to sit in on most of the breakout groups, and I thought the discussions were just excellent. As I said before, there were about 111 people picked at random for this, and about 50 or 60 of you showed up tonight. So that's a spectacular turnout. We appreciate you giving up your evening. There are a number of people that have joined us now in the audience as observers, and I'm going to ask you, please, even though you're going to be dying to participate in this discussion, we'd like you to refrain yourself. We're going to have the experts respond to some of these questions, and we want you to just listen, if you will. So I'm going to ask people to come up to the microphone. First of all, I want to thank everybody for completing the assignment, and let me go down the panel here so that you can get to meet them, our panel of experts. And if I have these in the correct order, I'm going to start on your left and coming toward me, and the first person down there is Kathy Campbell. Kathy recently completed 16 years of public service on the Lancaster Board of Commissioners. 5 as the board's chairman and 5 as the vice chairman. As an elected official, Ms. Campbell served on the Nebraska Association of County Officials Board of Directors and on the Region 5 Governing Board for Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities as vice chairman and treasurer. She continues her public service as a member of the Lincoln Electric System Administrative Board and an appointment by the Nebraska Supreme Court to the Committee on Inquiry. Kathy's a native Nebraskan. She was born and raised in Norfolk, Nebraska. She's a graduate of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. She has a BS and a master's in education. Next to her is Jim Fram. Jim grew up in Arkansas, but we won't hold that against him. Go Hogs. Where he attended West Arkansas Community College and the University of Arkansas at Little Rock, and he majored in business management and speech communication. Jim is one of only 12 active chamber professionals in the entire United States to hold the designation of both certified chamber executive and certified economic developer. And after serving in leadership roles in chambers of commerce in Arkansas, Texas, Oklahoma, Jim saw the light, came to Lincoln to serve as president of the Lincoln Chamber of Commerce in January of 2003. Under Jim's leadership, the Lincoln Chamber of Commerce has experienced a significant increase in membership, with the chamber now representing more than 2,000 businesses in Lincoln and solidly holding the designation as Lincoln's largest and fastest growing business representative organization. The chamber's also facilitated many economic development successes, including the successful recruitment of the zone office of State Farm Insurance, a $41 million expansion at Pfizer, and numerous small company expansions and relocations that produced many new jobs and new capital investment to Lincoln. Next to Jim is Dr. Susan Gourley. She's superintendent of the Lincoln Public School System. It's the second largest school system in the entire state of Nebraska. LPS serves 32,000 students in grades pre-kindergarten through 12, and students are housed in 52 schools. With a general fund budget of $259,725,000, the district has a staff of 4,000 employees, and prior to her position here, she was superintendent of the, Susan, help me here. Puyallup, of course, Washington School District, which is the 10th largest school district in the state of Washington. She has a Bachelor of Science and a Master's of Education in Counseling and Guidance and a PhD in Educational Policy Management. She's active in the Foundation for the Lincoln Public Schools, Junior Achievement, Leadership Lincoln, and the Lincoln Chamber of Commerce, as well as Cornhusker Boys State. Next to Susan is Joe Hampton. Joe Hampton remembers burning cow chips on a 140-acre Shadron farm during the Great Depression. He recalls saving every string. Nothing would be thrown away if it was at all usable. Joe Hampton entered Shadron State College after graduation from high school, and when his funds ran out after one semester, Joe became an apprentice electrician, working for 70 cents an hour. Hampton moved to Lincoln in 1947 because he could get 20 cents an hour more here. It's all about wages. He was 22 years old and he had $40 in capital. He began building a house in his spare time, evenings and weekends, intending it to be his own home. Joe Hampton made a giant step from home builder to developer in 1964 when he purchased 80 acres of ground at 70th and A Street for $160,000. I'm guessing it's worth more than that today. He paid half the purchase price in cash. That first venture became the area that we now know as Lincolnshire Square, and one of the first combination office parks and residential community developments in Lincoln. Hampton Enterprises and Hampton Commercial Construction have grown, and now they employ more than 65 people in a vertically integrated enterprise. The companies are engaged in land development, real estate services, general contracting, construction management, property management, including building maintenance, lawn, landscaping, tree relocation, and snow removal. Joe was elected to the city council in 1977 and served through 1989, was elected chairman, and was chairman from 1981 to 1987. Never before and never since has somebody served as chairman for 6 years. He's also president of the League of Municipalities, was in 1982. In 1986, he was named the 9th most powerful person in Lincoln, according to a survey of his peers. He was elected to president of LIBA in 1996. He was president of the Free Enterprise. He was presented the Free Enterprise Award in 1981 and the Business of the Year in 1990. Currently, he's chairman of the Tax Efficiency Committee. I heard a little bit of discussion in our breakout groups about taxes, so that might be an expert there. Next to Joe is Cecil Stewart. Cecil is professor and dean emeritus at the College of Architecture at the University of Nebraska. He served as dean there for 27 years. In 1996, he founded the Jocelyn Castle Institute for Sustainable Communities, with offices both in Omaha and Lincoln. He currently serves as the president and CEO of that JCI, Jocelyn Castle Institute. Cecil served on the Lincoln-Lancaster Planning Commission for 7 years and assisted in the writing of the current comprehensive plan, something else I heard some discussions about. Currently, he's co-chairman of the Citizens Downtown Action Team for oversight of the new downtown master plan in Lincoln. Cecil's a fellow of the American Institute of Architects and former national president of the American Institute of Architects from 1991 to 1992. And right next to me is Jennifer Brinkman. Jennifer grew up in Lincoln, graduated from Northeast High School in 1989, and she received her Bachelor of Journalism degree, so you're right at home here in this building. They didn't get this building. They were in that cruddy building across campus. But they did good by you. Her work experience includes roles as member of the staff to State Senator and Mayor Don Wesley, as well as a policy advisor to Governor Ben Nelson regarding health and human service issues. Jennifer currently is a stay-at-home mom to Catherine, age 3.5, and son Daniel, 6 months. She's an active community volunteer, having served on the Mayor's Infrastructure Finance Committee and the Streets, Roads, and Trails Committee. She's currently working with the United Way as part of their citizen review process and is past president of the East Campus Community Organization. Would you join me in thanking them for giving up their night to be here? Now here's what we're going to do. You've given me your questions. I've put them in priority order, tried to honor everyone's questions, and we'll try to move through them as quickly as we can. We're going to do this until we got about 1 hour. I'm going to ask Doc Chavez to come to the microphone, followed by Harlow Hyde. And Doc, we're going to start your question, and Cecil and Jim Fram, I'm thinking you may want to listen carefully to this first question and lead the answers if you would. So Doc, could you begin?
Good evening. This stems from the seemingly conflicting desires that you hear often said about we want Lincoln to have its small town charm and its intimacy, but at the same time we want to have it all. So our question is, can the city define what it wants to be and live with the consequences? And how do we do this, and who decides?
See what I mean, Cecil? Just a simple question to start this off.
Big question. Forum like this is the beginning of deciding. My view from a sustainability standpoint is that there needs to be more discourse about our opinions of the future and about the future. We have too few opportunities, I think, and it's not just a Lincoln problem. It's a community problem. These days, there are large gaps between citizens who have lives to live and desires about how to live those lives, and planners who think they know how people should live, with very little discussion between the two. So I think anything that you do to spread the information and the concerns you have both to your neighbors and your associates, and then back to elected officials, is going to get at what is it that this community wants to be. So my perspective would be more public discourse, less stay-at-home sitting on the TV, and more participation in the forums that your public officials provide you with.
I'd be a little careful about the TV comment. Public TV's fine.
I would tend to agree with Cecil that there needs to be a lot more discussion. I will say first that one of the things that attracted my family to Lincoln was the idea that you could come into a city of 250,000 people and it had the personality of a small town. I think there needs to be a lot more discussion, a lot more interaction. In my opinion, the discourse and the disagreement between a lot of groups is based probably more on lack of understanding and lack of information than it is on actually being in separate camps on some of these issues. So I would think that the first thing would be to have a lot of that interaction. I also, my professional opinion is that a community doesn't stand still in time. It either grows or it's diminishing. And I think you would might be surprised to know that I'm an advocate of smart growth, not wild, unabandoned growth, but growth that is planned and talked about years in advance and developed from a vision, and we end up with a community that looks the way that we want it to look. And I think through discourse and through sharing common ideas, we end up in that direction. The other side of that coin is shrinking or diminishing of the population of your community, and when you do that, you diminish the tax base. And then our elected officials who are sitting out here are going to have some very tough decisions in deciding which one of the programs that we all like have to be either shrunk or done away with completely. And hopefully if we can continue in the positive direction in what I like to call smart growth, we don't have to put them in the position of having to make those decisions.
Now, I didn't want to cut anybody off. I just wanted to start here. So, Kathy, if you have something, that's great.
I just have a quick comment, and then I'll pass it down to my colleagues. I read a great quote at the beginning of this week, which is the person who is least prepared for the future is the person who is unwilling to change or to see change. I think that's one of the things that we in Lincoln will have to become more adaptable and more flexible as we look at the future, because the key to the gentleman's question, I think, is not necessarily what we define as the future, because everyone in this room agrees we need to do that. It's how can we live with the consequences. And I think to some extent we have to begin thinking adaptability and flexibility and know that change is going to be a part of Lincoln as we go into the future.
Joe, you want to take a shot at this one, or are you okay with the answer?
Probably should stay quiet. I don't think there's anybody in this room, and I don't know anybody in this town that does not want a quality of life. But then a void emerges. How do you provide that quality of life? And without a solid, growing economy, there's no way that you can continue to support a quality of life. And if you have a static economy and a static population, you immediately start to cut your ability to provide services, because government has a built-in factor that if they continue to maintain all the services that we enjoy, you're going to have a 6 to 7% increase in cost of government a year.
Okay, Harlow, you're next, and then following Harlow, John Keller, would you be standing by, please? Harlow, what's your question for our experts?
Thanks, Mr. Bates. Our group had a very good discussion about 3 out of the 4 issues, as ladies and gentlemen should. When we got to the one about the Antelope Valley Downtown Master Plan, the fur really started to fly, and someone in the room said, "This reminds me of that old film, 12 Angry Men," in the jury room, although there were a lot of nice ladies there too. So basically, before we came to blows, we really decided that our question related to the downtown master plan in Antelope Valley is this. Who can give us a clear, concise explanation of the financing of it and the goals? Will it be from sales and property tax that's on our homes and so on? Will it be some sort of dedicated revenue project, or the area is kind of self-financing it? Will it be bond issues, and we'll have a chance to vote on those bond issues? Because I think the consensus in the room was probably, if it's not sold a lot better than this, you think that street bond issue went down. You know, wait till we get a chance to vote on the bonds of the Antelope Valley project. And lastly, you know, we need an explanation of what portion of this is really flood control or something essential, and how much of it is, you know, other things, frills, bells and whistles, you know, that's maybe being pushed by a small group of insiders, you know, that's one way of characterizing it, I guess. But we just want a much, much better explanation of to the rank and file people of the financing and goals of these two related projects.
I'm fairly giving the microphone back to Cecil, but since he's been a party to a lot of this kind of master planning, I think he can give sort of an overview of how we got here, perhaps to lead us off.
Well, I'll be happy to start the response. I'm not going to have the detailed financial figures for you. I think the Antelope Valley project, in my memory, in 32 years living in Lincoln, has had more public information surrounding it than any other project I can remember. There is a problem, though, in the communication of the information, perhaps, because it's so complex. It has many components. Just to come to your question about what was its real purpose, flood control is the primary motivation for that project. Once the investment is determined for the flood control characteristics, it presented some opportunities for other urban involvement with other parts of the city. North-south transportation has been a major problem in Lincoln for many, many years. This happened to be an opportunity along the street patterns and along the floodway to remedy that problem concurrently. Another problem that the planning side of the city of Lincoln has had in mind for many years is what is the eastern edge of downtown? On the west, we have the Haymarket. On the north, we have the university. On the south, we have the Capitol and state government. And as you drive from 16th Street east, it all pretty much is the same until you hit Gateway. There is an opportunity in this project to give a eastern edge to downtown. What is downtown to become? Do we want it to be a hole in the donut, or do we want it to be a vital part of this community that is the heart of the community? It's never going to be the commercial center that it once was, but it can be vital with other forms of commercial activity. That takes, in today's thinking about center cities, a mix of housing and commercial uses so that it becomes more of an urban neighborhood. I think all of those characteristics were in the minds of the public policy makers and the planners as this project began to evolve. And as far as I know, which I don't know as much as I should know perhaps about the financing, it is a complex set of multiple financial entities that are contributing and going into it, all the way from federal funds to local funds to an extended period of funding. This is a project that's going to take years to complete, and we will see parts of it developing more quickly in some parts of the district than others.
Can any of you speak to the financing? Generally, involved in neighborhood associations, and Cecil said this probably had more public involvement than any project in recent memory. Would you agree with that?
I think so, but my perspective came from working in the mayor's office for a couple years as Antelope Valley was actually completing their public involvement process and actually going through the voting process at the city council and the university and the Lower Platte South Natural Resources District. They're all involved. I think that, yes, all the materials and all the experience that people had with the project would tell you that I think they would cite, and I'm sure somebody out here knows the number, but over 100 public meetings were held as they developed the plans for Antelope Valley. So I think that it's probably very frustrating for the people that went to a lot of those meetings to come to terms with the fact that it's true, nobody really understands what all the pieces involved in Antelope Valley are and how it will be funded. My personal opinion from a neighborhood perspective is that we don't know where that financing is coming from, and it doesn't look like it's very secure. I think we're waiting, or we keep waiting. We're hearing that the federal government needs to pass this budget to get this done, and we need to wait for that to happen before the next piece falls into place. And it really reminds me a lot of the infrastructure debate, too. We're relying on the federal government to give us money for those beltways that we have talked about, but that hasn't really come forward, so we can't move forward. And I think that's probably part of the problem, that I know people that are working each day or being at home with their families are wondering, how does Antelope Valley affect me, and when is it going to start? I think that's part of the problem.
Joe, can you speak generally to financing public projects like that, since you've been in the development business most of your life? I don't know that you have the specific numbers related to Antelope Park, but I think what's behind this question is, how do we pay for all this stuff?
Win the lottery. Seriously, I've been in the development business for well over 50 years. And if you don't plan, and if you do not have a vision for the future, and if you ignore your older areas, it's only a matter of time before you get into trouble. Now, I think the Antelope Valley is a wonderful concept. Having said that, where's the money? And it was programmed on maximum gaining of federal and state funding. People are confused about what its real cost is, including me. At first we were told, well, it's a $240 million project, and then last week it was quoted, well, the first phase is $240 million. I think we're at a point where we really need to sit down and say the Antelope Valley is a good plan. We don't have the wherewithal to do it all at once or in the next 5 years. Let's program some doable phases and move ahead with it. This community, one of our problems, this community has 10 or 12 rather significant projects that we're talking about doing, and we really don't have the money to finish up the Antelope Valley. So we need to get some thoughtful consideration to how this is going to happen and when, and a little patience would go a long way. Now, I can tell you this, we got a proposal to clear out one block downtown for a new hotel. Ideally, that would be one of the later things to happen. But I can tell you this, in the investment business, opportunities don't always happen when you're ready or when you want them to. And there's not too many people that can walk up to the table and make that kind of investment. So when somebody's willing to walk up and say, this is what I'll do for a square block down there, and it'll enhance the overall community, we got to find a way to try to accommodate that. And I would repeat Jim Fram's words, however, the people that are being impacted by it have to be given maximum hold harmless consideration. Sorry, that's long-winded.
Okay, let's have John Keller come to the microphone, and Susan, you can start with the answer to this one. And let me just mention that Robert Ogden, you're on deck, so be ready with the next question. Go ahead.
Actually, it may not be to Susan that this should be directed, and I thank you very much and those in your charge for the marvelous work you've done to my 4 children in the Lincoln Public School System. The future of Lincoln, whether it's economic, cultural, or social, is very much dependent upon the public school system. Recently, we've seen levies voted down for additional funding for the school. We've seen programs in the arts and humanities cut. Our group uniformly wanted to ask the question is, how do we keep the Lincoln Public School systems, the quality and the capacity to measure it with the planned growth and economic development of Lincoln?
Well, first of all, let me say that thank you for entrusting us with the education of your children. And I'm not surprised that you find that that's a good education. As the new superintendent, I'm really, for those of you who don't know, very much the new kid on the block here in Lincoln. I have been here less than a year, but what I hear over and over again is the quality of the education that individuals in this community believe they have received, their children have received, their grandchildren have received, and they want to ensure that the generations coming in the future receive that same quality of education. I think that comes by very careful strategic planning. I think it comes by being willing to recognize where your strengths are and also where your challenges are. I used to say that it comes by being willing to look at the good and the bad and the ugly and face it. I've now come up with a new way of saying that. It comes out of a book that I've asked many of my colleagues to read called Good to Great by Jim Collins, and it talks about how good organizations become great organizations. And he talks about looking at the brutal facts of your current reality. And I think that's one of the things that, it's one of the first things you do. And in a way, it's what many of these other, and they truly are experts in this area, have talked about in regards to the future planning for economic development in this community, for meeting the infrastructure needs, for how we plan for the future. It's careful strategic planning, and you have to know all the facts. Just like the gentleman who said, we don't understand all the details about Antelope Valley. And when you don't understand, it's hard to plan for the future. And so one of the things that we've started to do this year is to look at what are those facts. What do we know about our population? What do we believe that population is going to look like in the future? And how do we need to meet those needs? A big issue for us is growth. And our students don't always move into neighborhoods. Those of you who are parents, you don't always move when you move to a new home or move to Lincoln, where we have room in a classroom for your child. And so what we have to deal with is, how are we going to deal with that growth? At the same time, how are we going to maintain these really wonderful programs that we have come to expect, appreciate, value, and want for our children? And we do that by some priority setting. We do that by making sure that we use all of our resources in the most efficient and effective way that we can. And by partnering. You know, one of the things that we know is that we have been able to provide some wonderful recreation facilities for our students by partnering with the City of Lincoln on some parks and recreation facilities. And what can we do in further partnering with other agencies, other educational institutions in town? And currently we're having discussions with Southeast Community College, the university, and other agencies about how can we partner, how can we leverage, how can we, if you will, collaborate in what I call productive collaboration to help continue those programs. And we all have to be involved in that. Those of you who are here in this audience and who want to be involved in this process, we would ask you to be involved not only in your local school, your neighborhood school, but in the school district. When we have budget forums, I think it's very sad that we only have 5 or 6 people come out. You need to come out, just if you have come out tonight, continue to come out and be involved in that process. I would ask if any of my other panelists would like to comment on that.
Part of the question was, is the growth and the capacity of the schools commensurate with our economic development plan? Jim, do you think about this as an economic developer? Is it part of the chamber's thinking?
Certainly is. We think about it every day. Probably the item on the list of things that people who invest in communities and create jobs look at, a list of 15 factors. quality of life, which includes public education, has probably risen to the top quicker over the last decade. I know that our Board of Education hired a consultant to come in and analyze the needs for physical plant for school buildings over the next several years, and came up with a figure that just with current growth trends that we have, we've got to spend in excess of $400 million. The Chamber of Commerce put together a task force. Joe was one of the co-chairs of that task force, and they spent a lot of hours trying to poke holes in that report. Really couldn't find a lot of holes. And other than prioritizing some of those needs and maybe suggesting that those be spread over a period of years, we found that report to be very accurate. I guess the bad news in that report is that accommodates only the 1.5 to 1.8% growth that we're experiencing now. If for some reason we were to have an influx of people into our community or more growth, that number goes up.
Okay, Robert Ogden to the microphone for your question, and on deck, John Keller. We're bringing you back for a question. The second question your group came up with, and this, Susan, I think has gone back to you.
And thank you for telling me where my son is this week, because he had a business trip to Washington and he didn't know how to pronounce your town, and I don't even remember now. But now I know.
I'll give lessons afterwards.
Thank you. Our question comes from a discussion that we are very proud of our public school system, and that we feel we want to maintain that quality, but we understand there's some limitations. The main support for the school system is property tax, and that's one of the limiting factors of what you can do with funding the system in Lincoln, is because property tax is the major funding portion, as opposed to the city, who can have a sales tax, and there's other use taxes that they can rely on, but you're pretty limited. So our question is, how do we find new revenue sources to grow and maintain the quality of our schools?
Well, you're absolutely right. And we cannot have a sales tax, and I don't think we're going to win the lottery. But if Joe wins, maybe he'll share with us. But, okay, there we go. I think we have to be as efficient as we can with the resources that we have on hand. And one of the things I always say to folks is that tough financial times, there's a silver lining in that. I must apologize. If it sounds like I'm losing my voice, I am. I have one of what I have learned must be the Nebraska cold, which starts in October, and I'm hoping ends sometime in the spring, so my apologies for my voice. But the silver lining in a financial dark cloud is it forces you to look at how you're doing business to be the most efficient and effective you can be. And over the last several years, Lincoln Public Schools has had to do that. In fact, I was in a meeting this afternoon where there was a number of reports about how we have become more efficient and effective because we had to be, because we had to live within our financial means. The next step is, and I talked a little bit about this earlier, is the partnering. And a wonderful example of that is a new entrepreneurship focus program, and you may know that currently Lincoln Public Schools has 3 focus programs: arts and humanities, informational technology, and science, or as we affectionately call it, Zoo School. The entrepreneurship focus program would be a partnership between Southeast Community College, the University of Nebraska-Lincoln College of Business, their entrepreneurship center, that allows us to provide opportunities for our students to continue that rich education, at the same time partnering and thus reducing the cost of doing that. And community learning centers. Many of you are familiar with those. Another example of how community partners coming together provide services for children in a way that if we were to do it alone, we wouldn't be able to afford to do that. But there is no lottery, there is no sales tax for us, there is no pot of money at the end of the rainbow. We have to live within the money we have. We have to be, if you talk about smart growth, we have to be smart budgeters. And one of the things that's very important to us is to know what the priorities of the community are. If you say, I think they should be spending it some other place, you need to come tell us that. Because the public education of a community should reflect in great measure the expectations and priorities of the community. I happen to think that a quality education for all children is a high priority for this community based on what I've heard. And I would tell you that I'm going to hand this off to one of my panel colleagues here in just a second. But I'm really glad you asked the question about quality education, because it's tied to quality of life. The quality of life, the quality of economic development, the gentleman who said the quality of our cultural life, our social life, our economic life, is all tied to education. Our crime rate is tied to education. It is probably the best investment we will ever make. And I say that knowing that you're not going to give me more money. So I'm going to have to use what you've given me. But I want you to know that I believe it's a good investment, and we need your help to make sure we use that in the very best way so we get the biggest return for it. Who else?
I hope this doesn't deviate too much from the question you asked, but I think it's relative. And being a newcomer, I think I see this in a different light than those of you that have been here for a long time. We are living under a tax structure that has been in existence for many decades. The amount of sales tax that the city can use is capped. The taxes that you can put on various consumer goods are restricted by law, and I know last year when the city even discussed the possibility of maybe using some gasoline tax to help pay for roads, which kind of makes sense, there was immediate flurry in the legislature to try to block us from doing that. There have been some very creative things done in other states that it's time that we take a look at. Oklahoma City 2 years ago passed a 1 cent special sales tax in their city. Half of that sales tax went to the schools, half of it went to build roads. By law, we can't do that now, but those are some innovative things and some creative partnerships that have to be put together, and instead of having the restrictive system we have now where every government entity seems to have their little pocket of taxation that when it was created may have related to what it's paying for, but today doesn't. And we have to get creative and develop those partnerships that we've talked about going forward to come up with new ways to pay for the services that everybody wants.
I just have a quick comment, and that is when you look at new revenue sources, sometimes I think what we read in the paper or hear on television about what is happening in the legislature, we don't often equate with how that dime or quarter will affect the schools in our community. And one way that we may be able to do, and hopefully that the paper does some of this, but could do more, is to help each one of us as citizens understand what is happening down the street in the Capitol will do. And then we need to step forward, and we need to be able to call our senators and say, you know, the Lincoln Public Schools or the University of Nebraska, who is in our community, Lincoln, Shirley, they need our help, and please understand how this legislation would affect us. And all too often, we don't see the connection. We don't do the dots. The one other thing I wanted to mention, and that is an element that I now work in, is human services. While that is not another revenue source, and many of you are giving so generously to make sure, but we have a great network of services that ultimately helps children and families gain the kind of independence so that when that child goes to school, they can learn in an effective manner. And so as a community, we need to see the connections from one to the other of how all of these networks help our children and youth.
As an old string saver, I can tell you that Susan Gorley has that same mentality. If she's going to take your dollar, she's going to spend it wisely. At least that's been an observation that I've gained in the short time she's been here. But when we were talking about the Antelope Valley, one of the components that I really forgot, one of the crucial components of that Antelope Valley project is called UNL. And our economic studies have said our future lies in being able to do more research and development. That project will take a lot of ground out of the floodplain and enable the university to have a research and development campus alongside of the Beadle Center. I don't want to drag this out, but there's something else I think you really ought to realize. This is a great community, but it's a government town. 35% of this community is off the tax roll. 30% of our payroll is tax supported. And maybe that explains why there is such a chasm between the people that say, I want a quality of life, but that big bad businessman, we don't want them here. And the thing I can never forget, this is a community that told IBM they made a mistake when they went out and bought a huge parcel of ground.
I should have kept the mic when I had it a moment ago.
I knew that was going to happen.
Me too. I think in a way my comment is an extension of what Susan was talking about partnering. My comment is on the question of looking for other revenue sources, as if that would be the solidifying factor for a better educational system. Yes, revenue is important. Yes, the economy is important, but there are ways to get efficiencies and effect other than depending upon the revenue. Look at technologies. I had a quick tour of this wonderful new facility earlier this evening, and upstairs there is a distance learning center that allows the students in this college to be connected to anyone, anywhere, at any time in the world. It's a technology, and yes, it takes some money, but it's a matter of the strategic planning and the priorities. How do we get our education? And where do we get our education? And what kind of education does the community want for your students and your children and your grandchildren? Another leverage is regional cooperation. Are we an island? Is this forever to be the government town that only complains when industry goes 50 miles down the highway? Or do we promote those industries together? And maybe they aren't located here, but they're in the region, and it has a net impact on the quality of what we can benefit from as a larger collective community. All I'm suggesting is don't only look at the money and don't only look at our feet locally. In this day and age, we have opportunities that we haven't begun to realize yet.
Jennifer, you're the only one that didn't say anything. This is a hot topic. You want to say something? Okay, she's got to get home to those kids. All right, John Keller.
Oh, I'm not John Keller.
You're not John Keller.
I'm
It's
Laura
obvious.
Stout, and I do have the second question of our group.
All right. And Jim Fram, Joe Hampton, be prepared. I think this is probably coming your way.
Do we have guidelines for economic incentive given to the businesses? What are they? And it says, can the public be more informed? But I feel more like the public needs to be more informed to make the decisions on the guidelines on these incentives, and that's it. I guess that's a statement. It ended with a statement.
Lincoln is very limited on the incentives that we use for economic development, primarily because of our funding. Our economic development program, business recruitment and business retention program, is funded by some dollars from the city and some private dollars that are raised, and the name of that contract is called the Lincoln Partnership for Economic Development. The total of our operating budget last year was just under $800,000. And that's for operations, not for incentives. The incentive program that we use are those provided by the state, which is primarily a tax credit program, which is famously known as LB 775. We partnered with the Omaha Chamber, the Nebraska Chamber, Nebraska diplomats, and anybody else we could get a few dollars from last year, and hired KPMG to do an analysis of those incentives. And to shorten the 30-page report, I will tell you that with those state incentives that are used commonly in the state of Nebraska, we are in the middle of the pack with our surrounding states. When you pull those incentives away, we are at the bottom of the list in all those states in being able to use incentives. I've said this in front of many groups publicly, it's no secret, and in my 24 years in economic development, I will tell you that I do not like to use incentives. I hate the part of economic development when you have to start negotiating what are you going to do for a company to get them to come to town. The problem is there are 49 other states out there that are going to use incentives, and the cities that we compete against are going to use incentives, and so we have to do something to stay on the playing field if we want to attract those type jobs and those type capital investments. I will tell you that in Lincoln, we have a very well thought out strategic plan for economic development, and we aim our recruiting at targets. We spend the bulk of our efforts and the bulk of our dollars working on companies that are already here to make sure that there's a platform in this community for them to continue to grow and to continue to create high-paying jobs within our community. But that's where our emphasis is. Our marketing is aimed just at those targets that we've determined have a fit in this community. And those targets are things like logistics, warehouse, and distribution, which in this day and age are very high-tech type businesses. Our obvious location in the center of the United States makes that a great target for us. Value-added agriculture. You don't have to drive very far in this country to see the connection between value-added agriculture. Specialty electronics, because of the engineering school that we have here, both with the university and in other institutions of higher learning in our community. We have adopted those targets that have a fit in our community, that we have a workforce that's trained for, and that tend to have a high level of benefits and high pay. And we think that's a very organized approach to economic development. Do we need better incentives? Yes, we do. We have worked again with the Omaha Chamber, with the Nebraska Chamber. Senator Landis from here in Lincoln has spent the last year sitting in task force meetings, and there are several packages before the unicameral right now that modernizes Nebraska's incentive program. And in some respects, if this legislation should pass, it does away with some of the negative things with LB 775 that people have complained about over the years. So we do need to realign that, and we need to take a look at it. If we could get our competitors to stop using incentives today, I'd be the first one to say, sign me up. I don't want to have to use them. I'd love to be able to go out and sell Lincoln solely on its quality of life and beauty as a city. But unfortunately, because of our competition, we wouldn't be very successful doing that.
Any other opinions on tax incentives?
Amen to what Jim just said. Jim's another bright new person to Lincoln that has a different perspective that he's picked up in his travels out of Arkansas. But I've been in business over 50 years. I would love not to have competition, but that's a fact of life. And if we want to attract payrolls into this community, we have to compete up to a level. Now, we have a very limited level of what we can afford to support. we don't have the billionaires in Lincoln that Omaha does. But we have one component that we can do something about, and that's start to get a picture in our mind that this is one unified community, not segments criticizing other segments. We have to be able to maximize every bit of limited resources that we have if we're going to attract new capital to this community and if we're going to support quality education.
Now, Don Ulmer, if you'll make it to the microphone, some of these questions now, we're about halfway through. You're going to hear some similarities, I think, in themes, and this is one of those, I think. So, Jim, the mic's coming back to you. It's a little bit different, but I think you began to answer it with the last question.
I think Jim did answer it pretty much. Is there a specific niche or area that Lincoln can best develop for economic growth and jobs? Is basically what we had.
Well, you heard me talk about our targets. I think the key to our program is that its emphasis is on retaining companies that are already here that provide good jobs and provide good capital investment. The first hire that we made when we reorganized this program 2 years ago was a young lady who's Director of Business Retention and Expansion. That has nothing to do with chasing companies and bring them into the community. That has to do with facilitating help for companies that are already here. We probably needed something like that 20 years ago, but it wasn't here at the time. We also don't go after any company that's looking to move. Our targets are based at those companies that provide a higher than normal wage, a little bit better than average benefit package, because we don't want to bring in jobs that aren't going to elevate our citizens to another level in their quality of life, whether that be financially or the house they live in or the school they go to. We want to try to keep that arrow pointed in an upward direction.
Any other comments on this? School of Journalism needs one more microphone, I'm thinking. Okay. Well, we need more resources. Elaine Wagner, I've got you down for the next question, and I think it's going to come to Jennifer first.
First, I'd like to say to Joe that my grandpa tried burning cow chips in the Depression too, but only once, because the ones he picked, huh? Yeah, he discovered that they were frozen. My group, the question I'm about to ask has a lot of obvious answers, and some of them are quick and simple. However, listening to the discussion in my group and listening to some of the questions here, I think that I would like the panel to try and avoid the obvious answers and go a little deeper. The question is, how can we, as a community, develop a process so that all can be involved in both the input and the outcome of decisions and decision-making?
This is my question. Well, I would say in my experience, and I was sort of thinking about this as I was listening to the panelists, because I didn't feel like I had an expertise as I was sitting up here. I don't have something that I work on, and I know they work more than 8 to 5 every day at their jobs, but I didn't have a particular expertise, but I guess I am up here because I have worked in the last 3 or 4 years as a volunteer on neighborhood association issues, and what we've seen in Lincoln over the last 4 or 5 years, maybe even longer, is that these volunteer organizations are seeing that in order to accomplish long-term and sustainable change in our community, we have to do things and get involved at the government level outside of our paid work. Things that we care about that affect our quality of life are not things that we get to just work on during the day. And I think that is a big challenge to all of us, because I do know that before I stayed home with my children, I can't imagine having that dichotomy existing where you are trying to pay for this quality of life by having a job and then actually trying to enjoy it when you get home at night. And then what we have to do as individuals, as we've talked tonight, is we want to tell everybody you need to be more involved. You need to take more of that time, which is so precious, and those very few hours you have, and we want you to take more time away from your family and try to help us create this change in community. I think, as Rod said, neighborhood associations are I think, have been described in the last couple of years as as organizations that are changing in Lincoln. I know when I joined my neighborhood association, I joined because I wanted to get to know my neighbors. I wanted my kids to know who lived next door, and I wanted to have somebody to watch my house when I went on vacation. And we have a nice 4th of July parade. I'll put in a little plug for that, East Campus, great 4th of July parade every year. And we have good spring cleanup. Those are good things. And they create a decent quality of life that we enjoy in our neighborhoods, and they're things that you have to do when you're not at work, and you work with your neighbors to do those. But I think that a small group of folks in the neighborhood associations saw that if we wanted to see long-term and sustainable change that affected our quality of life, we had to do more. And I think that that is why, if you've read about or heard about the Lincoln Neighborhood Alliance, what they are trying to do is take those precious few people that maybe have a couple of extra hours and bringing them together to talk about those issues where government can change some things that we think will improve our quality of life. And it's policy issues. It's not a lot of fun, and it takes a lot of time. The fact that not all of us or any of us up here could tell you details about Antelope Valley just tells you how difficult it is. These projects are enormous, and they are impossible to understand when you're doing it on a very limited part-time basis. So I think that outside of getting more involved, reading more, doing those things, I think what we need to do is connect more with the people around us. I think we've talked about what are our neighborhoods. I think they have changed over the years. I know one of the things our neighborhood faces is a lot more rental properties, which changes the face of the relationships that we have with people around us. And I think that the fact that we struggle to find time with our families while we're working all day long is that we don't get out to meet our neighbors and hang out on our front porches and do things like that. So I hope these weren't too obvious answers, but I do know that what I see as an emerging trend and a way to make change is to use those volunteer groups and those relationships to affect change in the city.
Cecil, I think the first time we really started to get to know one another was when I was in the Department of Economic Development, and you were working in the community improvement programs with communities all across the state, and you've expanded that all over the place. I can't think of a better person to answer this question on what people can do to communicate more clearly.
Thanks, Rod. I don't know that I have the answer, but I certainly agree with what Jennifer has said, and I certainly agree that a city, a community, is no better and no worse than its worst neighborhood. I think neighborhoods are the marker, the barometer of a city. It takes time to visit with your neighbors. It takes time to plan collaborative matters. But that's the place where you're going to get more information. That's the place where the information is going to have more effect than any other place in the city. Joe mentioned that this should be one community. How will we ever become one community if, for instance, neighborhood groups aren't talking to business groups? How will we ever be one community if neighborhood groups aren't talking to each other? How will we ever be one community if if people and the associations connected to state government we don't have a relationship for communication back to the neighborhood units, and the same with the university. I, for the last 9 years, have worked in both Lincoln and Omaha on sustainable development issues.